Good evening, welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. The stay-at-home order in England has ended and people can meet outside in groups of up to 6. The government wants to improve the mental and physical health of working-age people, and the giant container ship blocking the Suez Canal is finally freed after nearly a week. The stay-at-home order comes to an end in England as outdoor meetups and sports resume. It's part of the Prime Minister's cautious path out of lockdown. NTD's Genocide reports.
The latest easing of England's lockdown measures mean that outdoor sports including tennis, golf and outdoor swimming is back on. Groups of 6 can now meet outdoors, or 2 household bubbles can meet. Scenes from golfers in Sheffield keen for an early start with everyone glad to be back.
How would you describe it? Just happiness, really. Everyone's smiling. Everyone's got a happy story, and they're pleased to see you and pleased to see each other. We have a family feel at this golf club, so it's like seeing long lost friends after 20 years. It feels like, yeah, it's really, really good.
The Prime Minister, though, is urging caution with cases rising in mainland Europe and new variants that could put the vaccine rollout at risk. With an easing of restrictions comes a warm weather forecast over the next few days for much of the country. It's welcome news for these swimmers, up early for a dip in the Lido in southeast London.
I've really missed it a lot, so I suppose I'm really happy now I'm back. I literally didn't sleep last night because I was so excited.
I'm normally a pretty optimistic sort of guy, but even I've been waking up in the morning feeling pretty glum, not been able to come here. So yeah, it's the start of something new, hopefully. Start of a fresh start now.
Tennis players have also flocked back to the courts.
I think because tennis is one of the few sports that can actually be played kind of in a safe but also organised environment, we are getting so many applications. So there's currently about a 5 to 6 years waiting period if you want to become a full member.
The next set of restrictions will be lifted at the earliest on April the 12th, when pub gardens and outdoor dining reopen and we can get that much needed haircut. The easing of England's rules comes as Wales dropped its Stay Local slogan on Saturday. Scotland and Northern Ireland will follow, with similar relaxations in their rules in the coming days. Jane Warrell, NTD News, London.
The UK government has announced a new initiative to improve the nation's physical and mental health. It says absences from work due to ill health cost the economy around £100 billion a year. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the details.
We are always encouraged to get moving and keep our weight down. Lockdowns have made this task harder. Additionally, obesity has been shown to negatively impact our ability to deal with COVID-19. The UK government on Monday announced a new office for health promotion to improve the nation's physical and mental health. The World Obesity Federation recently released a report that looked into the links between COVID-19 and body weight. It says increased body weight is the second greatest predictor of hospitalisation and a high risk of death for people suffering from COVID-19. In those countries where overweight affects only a minority of the adult population, the rates of death from COVID-19 are typically less than 1/10 the levels found in countries where overweight affects the majority of adults. The president of the Federation told me obesity has become a very significant health concern in the UK today.
When I trained as a medical student more than 30 years ago, only about 7 or 8% of the UK population would have been classified as obese with a body mass index above 30. That is now approaching 30%.
The pandemic lockdowns have negatively impacted people too. The daily public transport commute disappeared.
What we have seen from the data is that people in their daily lives are perhaps less active than they should be, and less active than they were previously. So that will certainly contribute to obesity.
And increase in comfort eating has also been reported from his clinical patients. And according to Professor Wilding, the heavier you are, the greater the risk from COVID.
The risk of ending up in intensive care is about 3 times higher for people with severe obesity, a body mass index over 40, than it is for someone who is lean.
Even for those not obese, he says, we know that physical fitness has a big influence on the immune system. He says public health campaigns before tried to educate people about healthy diets, importance of physical activity and intervention with children.
But sadly, most of these at a public health level don't seem to have impacted this inexorable rise in the prevalence of obesity that we've seen in this country.
He said what is important is changes to what he calls an abnormal environment that has led to the obesity epidemic in the first place.
And that is going to need a lot of quite serious engagement with the food industry, and also thinking about things like town planning, about how we can make it easier for people to, for example, commute in an active way or do more walking and cycling to get around the towns and cities that we live in.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Monday the new Office for Health Promotion will be crucial in tackling the causes and not just the symptoms of poor health, and in the improving of prevention of illness and disease. The government says the new office will be established by the autumn. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Epsom, Surrey.
A huge container ship was blocking the Suez Canal for nearly a week, but authorities say today the vessel has been fully floated and traffic is resuming.
According to the Suez Canal Authority on Monday, the 400-metre-long Ever Given has been fully floated. Traffic in the waterway would now resume. After days of dredging and excavation, rescue workers used tugboats on Monday to free the ship. A Reuters witness saw the ship moving, and a ship tracker on Egyptian TV showed it positioned in the centre of the canal. The vessel became jammed across the canal last Tuesday, halting traffic on the shortest shipping route between Europe and Asia. More than 300 vessels were waiting to transit the canal, including dozens of container ships and oil tankers.
The flooding in 2019 to 2020 cost the UK £78 million, and it would cost an estimated £2 billion more without flood defences. The government plans to spend more on innovative flood defence schemes.
The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has announced a £150 million funding package to combat flooding in England. This includes 25 anti-flooding and coastal erosion projects. One of those is permeable road surfaces to improve drainage, also called spongy roads. Low-lying urban areas tend to get flooded as the roads there are hard and made with concrete, with no outlet for water. Slough in Berkshire will be the first town to become a spongy city. Some roads in the city will be replaced with a more porous material to better absorb rainfall and floodwater. The city will also have green roofs and natural vegetation to absorb water. Buckinghamshire will trial a groundwater flood alert app to warn residents and businesses of flood threats. Environment Minister Rebecca Powell says the government has pledged to invest over £5 billion in 2,000 new flood and coastal defences over the next 6 years.
The government has announced new measures to reduce the discharge of sewage into our rivers. Figures published in September last year showed that all rivers and lakes monitored in England failed tests for chemical pollution.
Water companies will have a legal duty to reveal every year how often they dump raw sewage into rivers. It's under new measures the government announced to help cut pollution in waterways. During wet weathers, Storm Overflows act to prevent sewers becoming overloaded with a combination of sewage and rain, but in recent years their use has been increasing. In 2019, water companies in England discharged untreated human waste into rivers more than 200,000 times. Additional duties rest on the government to publish a plan to reduce sewage discharge and to report to Parliament its progress on implementing the plan. The Rivers Trust Directors for Partnerships and Communications wrote, "We will be pushing hard to ensure that the plan that is delivered next year will include the specific targets for government and water companies that will result in an urgent and sustained reduction in this pollution."
Parliament continues its quest to find out if alleged human rights violations happening in Xinjiang, China can be called genocide. The Lords want to have former judges on a committee making that call. Eddie Aitken reports.
A group of peers is pushing to have former judges on a committee that will determine whether a genocide is taking place in China's Xinjiang region.
And that the best people to do that are judges who are well equipped and skilled in assessing evidence in an independent way. We were very keen that our own high courts might be involved, but government is not very keen on that.
The government prevented Parliament from writing into law that the High Court or a parliamentary judicial committee could make preliminary rulings on genocide.
What we've suggested as an alternative is that a committee of the House of Lords is created on which senior retired judges would sit and could fulfil that function of determination as to whether there is indeed a genocide in progress in Xinjiang province.
Benedict Rogers of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission says it's a very welcome move.
There are many very eminent retired judges in the House of Lords who are some of the most experienced judges in the world, and the House of Lords would be entirely within its rights to form such a committee.
Former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith also applauded the idea. Lord David Alton proposed a genocide amendment last year to the UK's post-Brexit trade bill in order to prevent the UK from entering trade deals with genocidal countries. After 3 rounds of negotiations and compromises, MPs on the 22nd of March narrowly voted in favour of a government version which designates a parliamentary committee. The author of the government's amendment told Parliament last week that current rules wouldn't prohibit ex-judges from being put on that committee.
And that could, of course, from the crossbench members of the other House, include members of the House of Lords with former judicial experience, but they will be there as members of the House, not as former judges, and that's their proper constitutional position.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Saturday met with 5 parliamentarians who China put on a sanctions list last week, including Lord Alton, Baroness Kennedy and Duncan Smith. The sanctions followed the UK's sanctioning of 4 Chinese officials over Xinjiang. Johnson wrote on Twitter, "I stand firmly with them and the other British citizens sanctioned by China." Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
From April the 6th, lorry drivers arriving in England will need to be tested for COVID-19 if they stay for more than 2 days. Under the new rules, hauliers arriving from outside Britain and Ireland need to take a test within 48 hours of arrival and then one every 72 hours. The rule applies to both UK-based and non-UK hauliers. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says this is to ensure we keep track of any future coronavirus variants of concern. Lorry drivers coming into the UK were previously exempt from testing, but with a 3rd wave of infections across Europe, the government wants to tighten restrictions on arrivals from the continent. And in other news, the so-called UK variant first took hold on the Isle of Sheppey. We take a look at the impact on the island.
The COVID-19 UK variant is more contagious, more deadly, and has now been reported in more than 100 countries. But it first took hold here, on the Isle of Sheppey, a flat, marshy island off the coast of Kent in southeast England.
Every single person was getting affected by it on this tiny little island. We've lost a lot of people and a lot of families have really been devastated.
Sheppey is no stranger to contagion. Britain's last major outbreak of malaria happened on this island, brought there by troops returning from World War I. The arrival of the coronavirus variant, B.1.1.7, was swift and destructive. Infections rose rapidly nationwide, and on October the 31st, England's 2nd lockdown was announced.
And so now is the time to take action because there is no alternative.
Despite lockdown, though, cases were still surging in Kent and southeast England, and public health officials couldn't explain why. Scientists puzzled from afar. Solving the mystery of the Kent variant was a race against time.
One of the things that the virus has taught me is that I can be wrong quite regularly. I have to be quite humble in the face of a virus that we know very little about still. And much of the learning means that we can't simply reflect on what we knew about previous coronaviruses.
Although the scientists couldn't stop the variant's conquest of Britain, they had become a warning system for the world, with the Isle of Sheppey as its unlikely poster child.